Introduction. The ASEAN Charter serves as a firm foundation in achieving the ASEAN community by providing legal status and institutional framework for ASEAN. It also codifies ASEAN norms, rules and values, sets clear targets for ASEAN, and presents accountability and compliance. The ASEAN Charter entered into force on 15 December 2008 at the presence of ASEAN foreign ministers at the ASEAN Secretariat in Jakarta. With the entry into force of ASEAN Charter, ASEAN will henceforth operate under a new legal framework and establish a number of new organs to boost its community building process. In effect, the ASEAN Charter is the legally binding agreement among the 10 ASEAN member states. ASEAN began life with a declaration, the Bangkok Declaration in 1967, and later a Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia in 1976. All of this is just to keeping with its well-known penchant for avoiding legalism and hard institutionalism. Therefore, why does ASEAN need a charter? By definition, a charter is a document that outlines a corporate body's principles, functions, and organizational structure. There are three main elements in the charters of regional organizations. The first one is to serve as a statement of purpose. The second one is the basic principle of the organization. And the third is its institutions. Other elements include membership criteria and the rights and duties of member states. Sometimes, regional grouping issues special charters to cover new issues areas. As example, in the OAS Inter-American Democratic Charter, adopted in 2001 to outline procedures for safeguarding democracy in the Americas. Similarly, the EU's Council proclaimed a Charter of the Fundamental Rights of the European Union in December 2000, which was later incorporated as the second part of the draft European Constitution. Looking at the rationale for an ASEAN Charter, the most important consideration seems to be the deepening and legalization of ASEAN. Since the end of the Cold War, ASEAN has grown extensively. Its membership has expanded to include all 10 nations of Southeast Asia, fulfilling the original vision of its founding fathers to unite the region. New areas of cooperation have also been incorporated, such as environmental and financial issues, as well counter-terrorism, but this broadening had taken place without the significant strengthening of ASEAN's institutions. Now is the time for ASEAN to change that. As we can see, this is why previously Malaysian Prime Minister Abdullah Badawi hinted at two possible motivations for having an ASEAN Charter. The first is to create an international legal personality for ASEAN. The other is to provide the legal framework for incorporating ASEAN decisions, treaties, and conventions into the national legislation of member countries. The latter will be an especially critical innovation. ASEAN has in the past undertaken collective dealing and bargaining with external countries, but a common framework for applying ASEAN decisions to the national level, if realized, will be a significant step towards legalizing and deepening ASEAN. However, there are three main shortcomings within the ASEAN Charter. ASEAN doesn't have an ASEAN community law, which will help to enforce the Charter accordingly. For example, the model of the EU's acquis communautaire. The shortcomings in regards to the significance of the ASEAN Charter mainly center around the tension between the need to integrate and the reluctance to yield to national sovereignty. The member states' reluctance to surrender to some levels of sovereignty make ASEAN integration difficult to envision. Acceptance of an ASEAN community law to govern ASEAN, whether binding or just as a guidance, would help the association with further integration. It is in fact the EU acquis communautaire which makes the EU so credible and strong in front of other international bodies. Imposing a definite legal structure and instituting more formalized rules would give ASEAN strength to face the many challenges affecting the area. However, there is no evidence to show that ASEAN member states are willing and ready to move towards a community law and change their national law in favor of deeper integration. One of the main challenges to the adoption of community law within ASEAN is also the two different political systems of the member states. While, for example, common law forms the the basis for the legal systems of Malaysia and Singapore. Indonesia follows the construct of Dutch legal system, and the Philippines legal system is rooted in strong influence from US law. Drafting a common law suitable for all those diverse political systems is, at least for the time being, highly unlikely. Secondly, ASEAN lack of supranationalism and institution building. The need for more supranationalism should be a pressing issue. However, as security and stability are still ASEAN's core issues, member states have hardly separated themselves from their national sovereignty and continue to regard the rule of non-intervention as fundamentally important to the national interest. Some scholars, like David Martin Jones, note in fact that it has been the sovereignty of the member states as well as the regional order built contingently upon the pragmatic decisions of states elites that have paved the way for ASEAN's successful and growth-oriented order. Martin Jones stated that supranationalism, as envisioned by the EU, might not be suitable for the ASEAN countries and might actually bring instability. Other scholars, such as Lin Chun Hung, instead regard the establishment of a stronger institutional structure as a fundamental feature for achieving better integration. While it seems to be a viable argument that the EU democratic values might not necessarily be the most suitable values for ASEAN to adopt, there are many characteristics within the EU, primarily in terms of institution building, which can be adopted also by the ASEAN. Consultation and consensus are still the preferred decision-making means. Unlike what the Treaty of Rome did for European Commission, the ASEAN Charter did not assign any coercive authority to the ASEAN Secretariat or Secretary General. As ASEAN leaders have repeatedly rejected the idea of supranationality, even after the Charter, there is no institution that can act as a de facto supranational decision-making organ within the association. A lack of this kind of power in the decision-making body highly hinders the possibility for further integration. Thirdly, ASEAN Charter doesn't include a review mechanism for dispute resolution. The lack of a common law and of higher supranationalism, the ASEAN Charter also provides no recourse for the ASEAN Secretariat should a member of government be unable or unwilling to implement agreement. ASEAN not only lacks a supranational decision-making or law-making organ, but also lacks a review mechanism for dispute resolution. Although many of ASEAN's agreements are technically binding, ASEAN has no central institution to uphold compliance with them. ASEAN member states is in fact depend on their voluntary compliance rather than on a legitimate body of law enforcement. Traditionally, disputes among ASEAN member states have been managed and contained by diplomatic means rather than the legal processes. However, the fact that member states bypass ASEAN to solve their disputes by themselves highly hinders the credibility, purpose, and effectiveness of the association. While the Charter has mandated that unresolved disputes be referred to the ASEAN Summit for resolution, the summit, functioning as the supreme policy-making body, is still subject to the will and interests of each of the national governments. The ASEAN member states seems still very far from being able to allow the majority approval of dispute resolutions decisions rather than consensus, even though such way would be highly beneficial for a future long life of ASEAN. Based on the above issues, we would like to recommend these recommendations to tackle the shortcomings. The first one is to develop a strong rules-oriented regime within ASEAN. The Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, the TAC, stated that ASEAN political and security dialogue and cooperation should aim to promote regional peace and stability by enhancing regional resilience. Regional resilience shall be achieved by cooperating in all fields based on the principles of self-confidence, self-reliance, and mutual respect, cooperation, and rules-oriented, which shall constitute the foundation for a strong and viable community of nations in Southeast Asia. For example, deeper cooperation in consolidating the rule of law as the basis for judicial systems and for social and human development through programs for training of judges, attorneys, and the police. Number 2, intensify on cooperation for regional and global environmental issues of common concern to address environmental degradation and work towards sustainable development. Number 3, cooperate closely to enforce the ASEAN Regional Forum, ARF, a more effective institution for security in the region. The second one is to remove any zero-sum mentality towards ASEAN. In order to have a better decision-making process, whenever any ASEAN counterparts went out for strategic partnership or mutual dialogue for issues, the zero-sum mentality must be lifted so that a negotiation process can be implemented in an effective manner. ASEAN must be treated as equal partners rather than an organization that can be trampled upon just for the sake of peace and mutual understanding. Among the principles that can be applied in giving out these impressions to the other nation is that Number 1, bottom-up, people-centered approaches to issues and challenges in the promotion of democracy, peace and prosperity. A rule-based regional order, particularly in the domain of maritime security, sustained by the principle of non-use of force as a means of settling dispute. Number 3, principles of the internationalism and open regionalism in promoting cooperation among the governments, not only in the areas of economic and social-cultural integration, but also in political and security cooperation. Number 4, the recognition of the increasing importance of a new type of PPP based upon people-centered, rule-based, and internationalist principles. Lastly, to develop a more solid dispute resolution method among ASEAN, it was argued that ASEAN has less methods of achieving regional peace meant being able to manage intramural disputes among the states in the region. Therefore, the ability to maintain peace and security in the region will assist ASEAN's success in managing disputes. This is important as it will help the process of confidence building and conflict avoidance among ASEAN countries and non-ASEAN countries. Thus, the objective can be done by Number 1, analyze the present state of play of alternative dispute resolution for consumer disputes in each ASEAN member state, and secondly, to have in place recommendation and guidelines to strengthen the systematic development of alternative dispute resolution in ASEAN as a whole. Conclusion: despite their distinct cultures, histories, and languages, the 10 member states of ASEAN share a focus on jobs and prosperity. Household purchasing power is rising, transforming the region into the next frontier of consumer growth. Maintaining the current trajectory will require enormous investment in infrastructure and human capital development, a challenge for any emerging region but a necessary step towards ASEAN goal of becoming globally competitive in a wide range of industry. Some experts have suggested that ASEAN reimagine its framework and decision-making practices. However, the causes of social change are diverse, and the processes of changes can be identified as either short-term trends or long-term developments. Change can be either cyclic or one-directional. To the degree the change processes are regular and interconnected, social change itself is structured. Change on different levels, social dynamics in every life and short-term transformations and long-term developments in society at large has been the focus of much attention in the study of society.